next lecture, lecture number 2 in the series, the networked image. This is going to be presented to you by Dr. John Hillman. After this session, we'll be having a little task for you to go through, and John will explain what the task is and exactly what you've got to do to fulfill the requirements of the task. But yeah, sit back, listen to what is a very interesting lecture now about what is happening today and what will be happening in the future of what we're calling the networked image. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll go through the lecture as a kind of obviously as a series of slides as the way it's been presented. But there is, as Paul said, I've put together a small kind of interactive piece for you to work through after the lecture, which does, I'm just giving you forewarning here, it does sort of ask questions that refer to the things that I'm talking about. It's constructed in the form of a test, a kind of online quiz thing. It doesn't, I'm going to be frank with you, it doesn't record your results in any way in terms of formal assessment, but what you should be aware of is the kinds of things that I'm going to talk about do come up as questions within this. So pay attention is what is the shorthand of this. Pay attention so that you can do the interactive thing and actually understand what's going on. So yeah, as Paul said, this is the second in the series of lectures that are the kind of themes for your module, and they should really influence both the practice element of what you're doing, but also the kind of theoretical, the writing document that we talked on Thursday about. So it's important at this stage, if you're interested in the networked image, this is the kind of point at which you'll probably get a lot of the kind of the theoretical grounding from which you can then kind of build your essay, but also build your practice. But hopefully those of you that may be less interested in this will just be interested in the kind of contemporary nature and the practitioners that I'm going to show you, some of which may be new to you, some of which may not. So the networked image, and I'll start with the first slide. So humans need and want augmentation. First we make our tools, then our tools form us. That's essentially where we begin this idea of augmentation. Is something which is really, really current at the moment. So the idea of things like Neuralink. So Elon Musk has kind of talked about the idea that we'd, if you like, store all our thoughts and our visions, our emotions in the cloud, and then you could kind of download them somewhere else, or someone else can download your thoughts and experiences. And there's lots of kind of philosophical contentions around this, but it's quite an interesting kind of moment for all of you, the way that technology is kind of, if you like, feeding into our body, our kind of our own subjectivity. So we embody that technology, or maybe technology externalizes our own thoughts and experiences. And I think that's something we can always refer back to in terms of photography, the idea of a Freud, so back in the sort of 1800s or beginning of this century, last century, so 1900s, Freud talked about the camera and the photograph being a memory prosthetic, And what he meant by that is that we can store our memories externally from our head in the form of photographs, and we've all experienced that in terms of photograph albums and things like that. But in the digital age, there's much more that we're storing, and we're storing it in a different way. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. The other kind of change for us is a change from the materiality of the print. So formerly, if you did a degree in photography, or if you studied photography in any way, shape or form, or if you were just interested in photography, a lot of the outcomes would be prints, as you probably are aware. Whereas now, everything has shifted from being prints to, in the more broader philosophical sense, to becoming data. And in fact, data is kind of king in our culture at this point in time. So everything we talk about is in some way related to data. So the digital becomes a kind of data era, as it were. And there's lots of things we could talk about that will go off in different directions, like data in terms of information science, and how much information we have about certain things. But I think in this context, what we're talking about in terms of data is the way that everything is stored as, if you know computer code, ones and zeros, so binary data. So everything, rather than being prints in a little box or a folder, suddenly everything becomes stored in a digital form. And actually there's a kind of equality to that. So your images, as they're stored on your computer, are exactly the same as your written Word documents. You know, that if you looked at the computer data code, it's very, very similar. So if you like, the DNA of everything, and I mean that across our kind of our data networks, is actually all very similar. So images are just one of the many things that have suddenly become data. Music would be another obvious thing. You know, it used to be Paul Lander would have his collection of Beatles records, and they'd be on vinyl, they'd be physical things. But now he's probably got a kind of Spotify account, and it's all digital. So yeah, another kind of key point that we talk about in terms of the network to image is this idea that images are distributed, circulated, and interconnected by this agency of machines and software. So this is, again, a move that's very different. For you, as students, most of you'll be probably what's considered as digital natives. So in other words, you've been working in and living this environment for pretty much most of your kind of the point in your life at which you become aware of these things. Whereas, as I said, for us slightly older people, this is all a new experience. So machines and software, they only really became kind of really prevalent sort of mid-90s onwards. And then sort of in the workplace, I can remember working in an environment where there were no computers, there were typewriters, things like that. So then we shift, that shows you how old I am, then we shift towards an experience where there started to be a few computers, and now it's pretty much ubiquitous across everywhere. So software, machines, and when we say machines, we're talking about all computers, so personal desktops through to server farms that are located in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. There's also this move from collection and ownership to democratized sharing. So I talked about the equality of digital data, but actually there's an equality of sharing that you experience. I guess the most obvious thing, and this is going to recur through things like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or any of those kind of platforms. We're suddenly able to share many things, so it's not the exclusive domain of one or a few people. Instead, we are all sharing many things. Well, that's the model, that's the claimed model. What I would suggest is we could look at that in terms of something like broadcasting and publishing. And if you think about news, so there's kind of like the formal news channels, which might be BBC or Fox News or CNN or RT, Russia Today, things like that, the kind of these formal news channels. But actually, we have other news channels which are kind of independent news. So you might have things that are YouTube broadcasters would be a really obvious thing there. So you have these YouTube broadcasters that come from nowhere and build up their own kind of following. But each of us individually has the opportunity to kind of broadcast our views and opinions. So there's something democratic in that, but there's also something that we should challenge in terms of, you're probably going to guess what I'm going to say, but fake news in a kind of Donald Trump-esque moment. We have something like fake news probably comes about because you can literally ask anyone of any opinion and you can grab all those things together. So you've got those kind of ideas. So my overarching question, which you may want to go on and discuss with Paul and Ravi and the rest of today, or just generally as you go through the next 3 years of your degree, is photography as we knew it now over? I think the answer to that question is, yeah, definitely as we knew it. But then I guess the next point is, so what does that mean? What is photography now? And that's certainly a question that I'm hoping to sort of unpick here, but also it's something that I think we're all very much interested in as scholars of photography, as people studying the subject. Yes, certainly you might want to make reference to old technologies and processes, but actually what's really important for you as students to go forward is saying, okay, what is photography doing now? And what are the things about it that make it contemporary, because you are going to be the contemporary image makers of the future. So the presentation is divided up into 3 sections, and I'm just going to go through them in sequence, not in order of importance. And what I've done is talked about the kind of theoretical ideas of this, of these sections, but also I've sort of sewn in some practitioners to demonstrate these points. What I would say is it was quite difficult to decide, does this practitioner fit within this, or does this piece of work fit in with, say, section 1 or with section 2? So they're purely my choices. I'm just going to read something to you from Martin Hand, who wrote the book Ubiquitous Photography, and I'm just going to read his introduction to chapter 1, which kind of sums up some of the importance of this. So just bear with me for a moment as I read through this. But what he says is, over the last 2 decades, digital images have become ubiquitous aspects of daily life in advanced capitalist societies. So in other words, the kind of society that we live in. The rise of digital photography as an ordinary practice has transformed the landscape of visual communication and culture. Events, activities, moments, objects, and people are captured and distributed as images on an unprecedented scale. Alongside dramatic changes in the relative dominance of the photographic, computer and telecommunication industries and the use of digital images in journalism, art, tourism, archives and medicine, people routinely make and store thousands of digital images recording the eventful and the mundane. Many of these are distributed by email or through web applications such as Flickr, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, or producing searchable archives of everyday minutiae. Others remain in private collections, albums, and traditional modes of display and viewing. Some become intellectual property or commodities, while others assume the potential to shape global events. It's hard to imagine any aspect of contemporary life that has not become visual content, as communications and social relations are increasingly mediated through or accompanied by digital images. The weaving of photographies as images and ideas, as devices and technologies, and as practices into every corner of contemporary society and culture produces quite a different scenario from that envisaged during the late 20th century. So what he's saying there, end of that quote, is that everything has substantially changed, specifically through this rise of photographs and through images. And again, I'm going to stress this because I think for you guys, this has happened really slowly and gradually in your lifetime. You've probably not really been aware of the massive shift, but everyone is a photographer, you know, having the mobile phone and essentially having that mobile phone become a computer, but a camera, and a camera that can also share the images that it takes. So its connection to the internet has been really important. It is a massive shift for all of us, but for society in itself, it's changed the way that we do things. Similarly, the rise of the snapshot and the increase in personal photography. So because everyone has a camera, suddenly we're taking more of what we would call personal photographs, things documenting the things that are going on in our lives. I suppose the obvious one there is the selfie. So the camera phone here, I'm just read again some notes here. This is not from Martin Hand, but notes on this slide. The camera phone shifts the notion of public and private life. Personal photography is a new genre which deals with the structure of feeling of a person expressed as a flow of images. Selfies treat the camera as a mirror, but share its vision with the world online. A personal life appears as a mutation of the categories of private and public. Personal photography is private life in public. That's David Bates from Key Concepts. So what you've got there is this mutation, and I think that's really important. And you can all reflect on your own lives of how much you share, and maybe how much you don't share. I think that's kind of an important question at this point in time, how much we curate our lives and how much we're willing to share, and then how much we look at other people's lives and see what they're sharing. And often, and I don't know, this is something you might want to think about, but often we look at other people's lives, particularly maybe on Instagram or Facebook, and we assume that they're kind of sharing everything. Yet we know that we maybe don't share everything. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself here, but we don't necessarily share everything. Yet we take a different view of the work that we see, or work that we see, or images that we see. So we have, there's a little bit of what we would call fetishistic disavowal, which is summed up by the phrase, I know very well, but nevertheless. So I know very well this is happening, but nevertheless, I'm going to, in effect, do the opposite or think the opposite. So I know that all the images on Instagram of my friend's wonderful life with him traveling all over the world, or, you know, meeting loads of people and eating, I know that's not really his life. Nevertheless, I'm still going to feel resentful and still feel like my life is not as important and not as validated because it doesn't stack up against his Instagram account, for example. So here we have an example of a practitioner who, I think, it kind of sums up this, the personal photography. So you're probably familiar with Ullman's work, but I'll just show you a couple of images, and then obviously you can go away and do some work. So Excellences and Perfections is a work created using the social media platform Instagram. During several months, Ullman posted on her account images where, unbeknown to her followers and friends, she enacted the life of an Instagram girl, in inverted commas, creating images that showed her as, inverted commas, a cute girl, and again, inverted commas, sugar baby or life goddess, following popular hashtags on the platform. The images followed her move to Los Angeles and subsequent breakup with a long-term boyfriend. They showed drug consumption, plastic surgery, shopping, nights in expensive hotels, breakdowns, apologies to fans, and recoveries. The photo performance comments on gender stereotypes in social media platforms, the relation between life online and offline, consumerism, voyeurism, and exhibitionism, as well as uses of social media for artistic purposes. And this is really important for you guys, that you know, this is an adoption of the platform in the form of the platform. So it wasn't just a critique of it. In some sense, it was using it to critique itself, which is quite an intriguing thing. What I did notice is, and you can probably critique me this, of the selection of images that I actually ended up choosing. So when I went back through my slides, it kind of looks like I'm showing you some sort of, soft porn account. But yeah, so apologies for that. Apologies that it doesn't come across like that. But this was the kind of selection of images that came out of my research. The other practitioner that kind of works in a similar way, so building off Instagram, or in this project, Richard Prince, was a series called New Portraits. And again, you can look at the date here, 2014, that's 6 years ago, coming up for 7 years ago, so quite a long time ago. And what Richard Prince did was he literally took other people's Instagram images and created his own show. So Prince has pioneered appropriation since the mid-1970s, so it's not the first time he's done this, mining images from mass media, advertising and entertainment to subvert and redefine concepts of authorship and ownership. So he's kind of talking about who owns this work, but also who makes the work. And actually, we were talking about this in the third year about dissertations, you know, how is work made? Why is it that if Richard Prince, and this is just a speculative question, if Richard Prince takes some Instagram images, blows them up to kind of 6 foot by 6 foot and puts them in a gallery, why do those images become art? Whereas when they're just on Instagram, let's say in my account or in anybody else's account, they're not art. And there's a question there for you to think about. What's that move? What has happened to those images to transform them from simply images on Instagram to becoming art? And the argument, the answer there, part of the argument is just simply by their location, by relocating them off the platform and into a gallery, they become art. Of course, there's a lot of things that need to go into that process in order to make that point. So here's some installation shots. You can see kind of thing. Again, it's very similar to Ullman's work in some sense, although these aren't created by, should we say, the artist himself, Richard Prince. So these are literally created by someone else's. So imagine your work suddenly appearing there, you know, in a New York gallery. Imagine how you'd feel about that. And Prince is not a stranger to litigation and to being sued over the kind of the appropriation of work. Okay, so there is this increase in photographs being taken, seen and shared. And as I said right at the beginning of my introduction, data is, if you like, the source of a new aesthetic. So people are really interested now in data as a way of articulating visual kind of visual images, visual artwork. And there is something formally interesting about the aesthetics of data. And for anyone that's kind of following the constant and daily updates on COVID and the graphs and the, you know, the poorly presented or sometimes really, eventually the data there, and here we're just talking about, you know, medical data, but the way it's presented to you in a particular way becomes a kind of art form in itself. So someone who's looked at data in many different ways, and I'd strongly urge you to go and do some background research on Lev Manovich. So he's kind of more of a he's an academic. He works at MIT in America, but he does a lot of really interesting projects based around things like images. But also his interest really is in the computer, the software and the data side of things rather than images itself. But what he does produce is these really aesthetically pleasing projects. So they are ostensibly about data, but actually they look really good. They're really interesting to look at and play with. One of the most interesting ones, and I really like this piece of work, is called On Broadway. Again, it's quite an old piece now. But what this does is it takes various data sources from a kind of moment in time in New York, and it essentially formulates that data into something that you can read and interpret as it were the life of a city. And he takes things, as you can see there, landmarks, anecdotes, Google Street View. He takes the colours, so he takes the Pantone colours from the palettes, but also things like taxi statistics, so a number of Uber drives that were booked over a period of time, the number of Instagram accounts that were Instagram images that were uploaded from a particular area and tagged with that. And he's done these other things, the other projects, things like something called Selfie City, where he kind of analysed, did some facial recognition on the number of selfies taken in different cities to, as it were, use that data to express whether the city was in a happy mood or a sad mood. So kind of, you know, how many people took happy selfies over a particular period of time, and therefore the city was in a happy state of mind. So you can see there's lots of things you can do here. But actually what I'm really interested in, I'm showing Lev Manovich in terms of him being a kind of artist at this point, which is probably something he'd kind of shy away from. But it's the aesthetic that I quite like about his work. You know, there's something really enjoyable about looking at this data. And as I said, he's a serious academic. He works in terms of data, and everything he publishes is open access. So you can download his books, even though you can buy his books, and you can kind of read it in that way. So it's all about the kind of intellectual property, but actually there's something really aesthetically pleasing. The other practitioner, Trevor Paglen, did this piece of work that was at the Barbican last year, From Apple to Anomaly. And this was basically taking a series of images and the kind of linking those images from an apple through to all the kind of different deviations of that idea. And it was presented in the curve at the Barbican. So it was just like a whole series of images, and they were all little squares. And they think you can probably see from there, you've kind of got apples at the beginning, but then it kind of moves on to fruit, and then it moves on to different things that are the same color, same form, and same. So it's kind of like when you do a Google search, and I think I've used this example with you guys before, but you know, when you start searching for, I don't know, you want to book a holiday, and then by the end of your search, you're suddenly looking at, I don't know, Dr. Martin bootlaces or something like that. You know, you kind of, but you've gone all around the houses, sort of visiting all these places and doing stuff, and somehow the whole experience of the internet is it's a collision of things that you didn't think really fitted together. And yet what Paglen did is kind of fit them all together in some way in this artistic piece of work. And as you can see, the aesthetic is sort of quite important to the way that it kind of is delivered to you as a set of ideas. Okay, so that's section one. That was the kind of personal photography there, and you can see where I've sort of drawn some of those things. As I said, probably some of those artists would fit into section three, which I'm going to come to in a minute. But section two is about how the change of the spread of news. So there's been this change in the spread of news and public perceptions. So essentially, we've all been much more closely connected to one another through our mobile devices and through this kind of being able to share news. So the internet and social media are powerful tools that influence and shape human behavior. Social media has played a significant role in recent outbreaks of social protest and resistance. So this is the Arab Spring, which happened between 2010 to 2012, which was a political movement in the kind of Middle Eastern countries, and certainly in Egypt, sort of it instigated a kind of overthrow of the government at the time. And what happened was pictures were shared, and then that mobilized people to go to the event or to do something or to kind of protest. This is another image which you've probably seen, a selfie. It's one of the most viral photographs. Difficult to kind of pin that down because they all they change on a daily basis. But photographs have become part of the spectacular global consumer culture, spreading like viruses on the internet and on television. So this was celebrities at, I think it was one of the Hollywood Awards, probably. And you can see it just became a kind of overnight sensation, simply because celebrities, people that get photographed all the time, suddenly photographing themselves. There's some peculiar irony in that. This is a news image, again, sorry, disturbing as it is, but this was about the war in Syria. So this was Alan Kurdi and I'm going to destroy the pronunciation here, Nilfer Demir, I think is in 2015. So the war in Syria been going on for more than 4 years, when Alan Kurdi's parents lifted a 3-year-old boy and his 5-year-old brother into an inflatable boat and set off from the Turkish coast for the Greek island of Kos. His body was washed up on the shore, and this image circulated around the world, actually did cause a sort of political shift in terms of our perception and understanding of migration and the issues related to that. So it made a really political story that was actually being overlooked. It turned it into a personal story. So this relates back to the personal. So suddenly we as a population, I think global population here, connected with this story. And it was a very disturbing, and still is a very disturbing image. This was another one of a video. So we're looking at moving image here. This is the recording of Diamond Reynolds. And what happened was, the police shot her. She was in a car in America, and the police shot her boyfriend, and he was bleeding to death as she videoed what had happened. I don't think she actually videoed the shooting, but she was videoing her boyfriend as he died. So it's the aftermath of being shot by police officers. It was viewed by millions of people online, and is one of the pieces of media that acted as a catalyst to the Black Lives Matter movement. Of course, this has now probably been superseded by the more recent events during lockdown of the police officer kneeling on the black man on his neck and killing him there. But this is that kind of thing. So what's presented to the viewer in this one is the images and the voices that the camera captured. But it's not only a documentation of the event, it's also perception of a reality that is bigger and more complex than any representation. So in some ways, these images challenge our notion of the kind of truth of images, not because they're not showing us the truth, but because they show us a kind of political snapshot. And I use that word not in the context of photography, but they show us something that's going on in culture that is hugely complicated, that can't be encapsulated in a single image. So yes, that's the news. So you can see the news is already kind of spreading around like wildfire about the elections and things going on there. But every day there's a kind of a new news story, and we become citizen journalists, you know, go out and photograph, film, whatever is going on. So section 3 of my presentation is about the new types of images and practice. And as you can see, we probably could have included some of those practitioners in this section. You know, they were dealing, you know, Trevor Paglen deals with new kinds of images. Richard Prince, in some ways, it's a new formula. But I wanted to talk specifically about the kinds of things that are really emerging, that are sort of more cutting edge and maybe less commonly associated with photography. So the first thing here, we've got augmented reality. So here you can see a kind of technological use of augmented reality. You hold up an iPad in front of machinery, and it kind of gives you some sort of additional information about it. Perhaps the more commercial application, this was the Pokemon Go a couple of years ago. So you'd walk around the city, you'd use the app to see things that weren't really there. I mean, real interesting kind of idea that this is virtual imaging, so the images aren't there, but somehow they're kind of mediated by the phone, or iPad, by the computer into being there. So you might question here, if you're going to, you know, take this into a philosophical mode, where is the reality? You know, is your reality, because as you get absorbed by what's going on the phone and the gameplay, is your reality actually in your phone rather than in the streets of, you know, walking along New Street or walking along to Parkside? You know, is your reality actually in the phone rather than in reality? Because reality is absent of these Pokemon figures. They only appear in your phone. Another kind of possibly slightly overlooked imaging practice is CGI images, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this in terms of you know, its formal use in terms of, say, architecture and re-imaging buildings and things like that. So you've got CGI images are essentially images without an indexical relation to the material world. So this building and these trees and that snow scene never existed. So before, when we talk about photography and film and cameras and lenses, the assumption is that the thing that we photograph was there in front of the camera at some point. But with CGI images, much like I talked about with the Pokemon Go, this building never existed. So these are photorealistic virtual worlds. They're generated by a computer using three-dimensional modeling software or other computer software for presentation purposes. Some methods create simple flat images or images with basic shadows. In some ways, these have become more and more realistic as we sort of go forward and as the technology gets better, to the point at which it can be quite difficult to tell whether they are real photographs, and I'm using that word real in a very traditional sense, or whether they are kind of photographs at all. Perhaps back to that idea of what, you know, is photography changed, then what we can say almost with certainty is that this is the grounds of the new photography. So what I'm showing you now is something some of you might be familiar with. This is in-game photography. So in-game, in a computer game, so something like Xbox or PS or PlayStation, and using game modules to take images. So in our lives, as our lives take place increasingly on screens, our avatars become more and more photorealistic, and models of cities and people become algorithmically generated. Photographic practices that deal with the representation of society are radically transformed. How can photography document these new modes of interacting, and what does it mean for photographers to exist in such spaces? Furthermore, what happens when photographic acts are simulated and photorealistic avatars become the subjects of our portraits. What can photo reportages of these virtual yet very real worlds tell us about our interactions and about photography at large? So you can see that this is a space where we can start to really think intellectually about what is happening. So Gareth, Damian, Martin works with in-game photography, the continuous city. I think this is Grand Theft Auto. So these are images, and I'll just read a little bit about his work. So the continuous city is Martin's photographic journey through the most exciting, diverse and strange urban spaces of our time. Those are video games. Structured as a travelogue through a rich tapestry of different virtual cities, it draws out aesthetic connections between game spaces across genre, style and setting. But rather than simply catalogue these spaces, the continuous city uses techniques to photograph them with 35mm cameras. So what he does is actually project the space onto a wall, and then he uses a 35mm camera with film to photograph these. So they've actually got some sort of film grain and kind of an analog aesthetic to them. Yeah, so he uses a projector and high ISO film stock. So these are kind of a real hybrid between the virtual and the analog. So I'll just read you a quick quote from Martin. He says, "I think photography is a useful term as it connects the work to a heritage and history of conceptual still life and object photography that stretches all the way back to the beginning of the medium. Screenshotting," so he's talking here about the difference between screenshotting and photography. So he's kind of claiming an allegiance to photography. And he says that screenshotting connects the work to a history of commercial interest, product showcases, advertising, and he thinks that limits how we might think of his work. So he's very much aligning himself to the idea of photography. Matt Collishaw, he produced something called Thresholds, a piece of work in 2017. Again, I'll go through this very, very quickly, but this was a virtual reality piece. So you stuck on a headset like this, and you walked around this environment that was all white, but what you saw was this, which is actually a restaging of a photographic exhibition, one of the earliest photographic exhibitions. And so this was all done with kind of virtual reality and virtual headsets. Really, really interesting piece of work, and we could talk more about that at some future point. But this is kind of, again, at the cutting edge and the hybrid of these different things. Mishka Henna's work here, No Man's Land, represents Google Street View. So she basically takes Google Street View images of sex workers, and I'll kind of spin through this quickly because I'm aware of time and how long I've been talking. So essentially what you've got is taking Google Street View images, but they're all allegedly sex workers shown in Google Street View. So you can see this kind of work hasn't even sort of, the photographer in inverted commas hasn't even gone out with a camera, or hasn't even gone out and shot things directly. These are kind of used images, as we're all aware, of Google Street View. And another project from Mishka Henna is this one, Dutch Landscapes. And what this is the redacted landscapes that we're not allowed to see. So usually military sites and those kinds of things that are government installations. And basically they've been pixelated out here, and the work is then presented as a kind of more as a formal aesthetic, but obviously also a kind of a critique on what we can see and what we can't see, who allows visibility to kind of come to the surface, as it were. And you can see that visibility is still structured by those in control of the instruments that give us that vision. And so in this case, the government, or perhaps Google. So Doug Rickard, a new American picture, depicts American street scenes located using the internet platform Google Street View, so very similar to the previous work. But it looks over a 4-year period. Rickard took advantage of Google's imaging to archive and virtually explore the roads of America, looking for forgotten, economically devastated and largely abandoned places. After locating and composing scenes of urban and rural decay, Rickard rephotographed the images on his computer screen with a tripod-mounted camera. So again, you've got that revision back, or that reference back to photography, freeing the image from its technological origins. The low-resolution images that Rickard favours have a dissolved, painterly effect and are consistently populated with figures who acknowledge the camera but whose faces are blurred. And I would say, again, you're seeing this mediated from my computer screen through Teams on your computer screen. So we're seeing something very, very different from perhaps what was anticipated in the work, but I still think it's reasonable for you to kind of look at these and gain an understanding of it. So there's something here that's a hybrid between work taken by others and then work kind of appropriated through the camera. Similarly, Thomas Ruff did work on JPEG. So he produced this series without using a camera, and instead he printed compressed electronic image files, JPEGs, many of them downloaded from the internet at monumental scale. So this is like blowing up the data to the point at which it kind of breaks down. And actually, this is usually the kind of stuff we try and avoid. You know, often you would, certainly in the beginning of digital imaging, this would be the way you go, oh no, my image is just too low resolution to be shown to anyone. And Ruff is kind of making an aesthetic of if you like, a constraint. So I'll just read a quote here. The photographic art of Thomas Ruff makes very particular demands of us and offers very particular kinds of both pleasure, kinds of pleasure and both aesthetic and intellectual. His work seems cold and dispassionate, willful, searching and perverse, but at times surprisingly beautiful. Whether he's working with found photographs or shooting his own, the results are similar. He makes images that are once familiar cliches and estranged visions of our collective photographic order. So you can see, again, I'm looking at these on two screens because I've kind of got a double screen set up here. One of my screens is really big, it's a TV screen. And actually on the big screen, these look quite amazing on my computer. My computer's doing its best to kind of disguise the JPEG artifacts. So I would urge you to kind of blow these up and look at them as they're meant to be seen, which is huge in huge scale. Penelope Umbrico, she does a work, and it's a project that I'm going to show you here, Sunsets, Suns and Sunsets from Flickr. So again, this is kind of taking work, and she takes work that looks at the subject matter. So in this case, sunsets, suns and sunsets. And I'll just quote here, she says, I searched the photo sharing website Flickr and found sunsets to be the most present, i.e. tagged, resulting in 541,795 hits in 2006. So we could probably add substantially to that. She goes on to say, I thought it peculiar that the sun, the quintessential giver of life and warmth, a constant in our lives and a symbol of enlightenment, spirituality and eternity, all things unreachable and ephemeral, omnipotent, provider of optimism and vitamin D, is so ubiquitously photographed and is now subsumed to the internet. And these are the kind of things that she produces. And again, if you go on her website, you can see a whole range of these things. She says, I collected these sunsets from Flickr that had the most defined suns in them and cropped them just as suns from images of suns and from these sunsets, which are uploaded to consumer photo labs and printed to 4x6 machine C prints. So a real kind of personal, very traditional process, a fairly standard I guess fairly common process for printing. So not using kind of high-end archive material or anything like that, using kind of things that are available to all of us. And here's this kind of some reversal going on here, so inversions of the images. So we're coming towards the end now of my presentation. So this is another piece of work from Umbrico, and I kind of thought it was interesting in terms of its David Bate did a similar thing over the summer with his broken laptop. So he rephotographed his laptop and the screen was kind of broken. And these are all broken interfaces, broken screens. So an installation there of broken computer screens displaying images. And here we've got the insides of, I think, the mobile phones, but technology as well, so computer screen there. So again, for those of you struggling with content in our imminent 4-week lockdown, you know, I can't get out and photograph anything, you can take apart some of that old technology that you've got and produce some of these rather beautiful, some still lives in a very formal, almost commercial way. I mean, I was doing stuff like this years ago. It was kind of commercial, technical photography, and now it's kind of moved into the art domain. And again, you've got here some bad display monitors. These are just the video, the screens removed, and actually what you can't see there in the corner on the left, these little images are just photographs of cabling. I mean, we all have so much plastic cabling these days, and just put together as a series of images. So it's kind of great. It's images from the stuff that we just take for granted, and I think it kind of points something out to us. So Eric Kessel's, sorry, just go back to that, it's 24 hours in photos. So he collects photographs and, you know, from flea markets, from internet, from eBay, stuff like that. And he put together an overload of images. So this was the number of images printed in any one day, and he kind of printed it out as 350,000 images upload. So these are the images uploaded in a 24-hour period. So he materialized the data, the digital data, and made us feel it, made us see it. What does it look like? It's huge, huge if it's printed out. And I think that's where my presentation is going to end here, in this kind of shift from materiality to, from digitality, from the digital to the material. And I think there's this constant shift from our lives being completely online and completely in data to something where our lives are suddenly materialized. And I think we're, you know, increasingly in a world where we are perhaps being asked to minimize our contact with each other and in effect make ourselves kind of digital. What we want more and more is a kind of analog experience. We want to kind of meet each other and have a coffee. We don't want that kind of remote digitalization of our experience. So I think that's something to reflect on now, very much in a kind of coronavirus moment where we're being pushed into our individual curation of life. And actually, perhaps what we all would enjoy is a celebration of togetherness at some point. And I'm gonna end there. Thank you for listening. Sorry, I did go on a little bit longer than Paul's timetabled slot, but I hope that was valuable. That's the end of my presentation, but actually just before I kind of sign off completely, I will just share with you my desktop again if I can. I'm not sure if I can at this point in time. I just wanted to go on to Moodle actually. Let me just, I'll close PowerPoint and that might enable me to do it. Okay, at this point in time, my computer's not allowing me to share my screen. What I have done though, is as I said, I've uploaded to Moodle a short video, interactive video. And basically it's a piece of artwork that is kind of, it speaks to some of the things I've talked about, but through it there's a series of questions, as I said, that will kind of just get you to think about the kinds of things I said throughout my presentation, and you just have to answer. They're kind of multiple choice, or they're kind of click, and it's fairly straightforward. So if you go onto Moodle on week 2, there's a presentation, and it says there it's a video, so you click on the video, and then it should come up with some questions as you go through. It's very short, it's about 2 minutes, and it does give you whether you've given the right or wrong answers. But as I said, we're not collating your score, as it were, but it's just something to, as a kind of way of recollecting the kinds of things that I've said. It might just help you think through that. Okay, I am done on that. If you've got any questions for me, I'll kind of take them now, and then maybe Paul can kind of go into the next session or whatever. We're working. Questions, your chance.
John, thank you very much. That was incredibly interesting. So guys, do we have any questions for John while he's here?
I did want to ask that all the references to the artist and stuff, would that be given? And I think John already said that it was going to be on Moodle.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll upload my presentation to Moodle as well as a PDF, so you'll be able to see everything there. But then also, as I say, there is this online thing which you can look at as well. So yeah, you will get kind of resources to this. So and there's a recording of this, so you'll be able to watch it again if you want to.
That'll be great. Cheers.
John, I wanted to make a couple of points, just
Sure.
you know, to the group, and to, you know, just to try and sort of arouse some sort of debate about this. That obviously, you know, we've spoke about this at length in the past, and you know, to me now, that the thing that has changed in, you know, in my lifetime over the last 20 years is almost this sort of this sense of ownership with images. And you know, you use music as an example. That you know, when I was a kid, we went out and we purchased vinyl. That vinyl was ours. It's something we collected, and we was very sort of proud and precious of being like a member of, you know, that group or that clan that liked that sort of music. Of course, things have changed now, and you know, I related to photography. That, you know, we went through a very sort of handcrafted sort of process. That when a photograph was produced, it was like our possessions, and the whole notion of possession of photography has changed over the last 20 years. That, in fact, it's the possession of anybody in the world, and whereas I always thought my photography was for me in the past, you know, either, you know, from a very domesticated sort of sense, it was for me and my personal memories and recollection. Obviously, from an artistic sense, it was for other people. But, you know, the whole notion of photography nowadays is about sharing with the world. And I'm just thinking, you know, when I think of people like Richard Prince, you know, if you're sharing your work with the world, isn't it fair to say then the world owns it, and you know, anybody in the world can do whatever they like with it, which is quite profound from when I was a kid first studying photography.
Yeah, I think ownership and sharing kind of importantly have shifted because of the process, and then as a consequence of that, I think because of the kind of desire to monetize certain experiences as well, there's kind of been lots of dynamic changes to that. And I was thinking, yeah, you're right about music and stuff, but software is another thing that has shifted. So we've moved from, I can remember buying CDs or DVDs of Adobe Photoshop, and now we rent software from, you know, we pay this a subscription, the subscription model to things. So suddenly ownership has become a really strange phenomenon because we want to share so much. I think we give away our ownership, but at the same time, I think business has tried to sort of say, actually, if everyone's giving away ownership, how do we reconfigure that model? And certainly in terms of photography, the idea that everyone kind of shares their images has meant that copyright, and I know we even as we teach copyright to you guys as students, it's kind of, it's almost like an outdated thing because people don't have copyright in quite the same way anymore. And you know, another example would be movies, where you're kind of constantly downloading movies, if you're that sort of person, constantly download, you know, from Pirate Bay or whatever. You know, where does the copyright sit, and where does the kind of ownership sit? And these are problems that we can kind of, you know, we can be radical and subvert them and kind of go, yeah, you know, I don't pay for anything, it's part of the global commons. But as content makers, we might have issue with that. You know, it's going to be difficult for you to earn a living if everything is free. If people can, you know, literally if you become a film director, if people can rip your movie down from some dodgy Chinese website or some Russian website, that's going to be a problem for you if you want to make more movies. So we have to find different ways of kind of, as it were, commercializing the product if we're going to continue making things. And I think there's no strict answer to this, merely a set of problems that emerge all the time. And in a way, I think that's what Richard Prince is doing, is kind of bringing that to the fore, although probably in quite an uncomfortable way. But I definitely think that idea that we all own everything is kind of good in a very democratic way, until you realise that some people own more than others, as it were, in a slightly, kind of in an Orwellian sense. That I feel like I own lots of things until I actually try and have access to it in the way that I want to do it or use it. I occasionally buy movies off Amazon Prime, and sometimes I wanted to use clips of those movies in my lectures, and Amazon Prime, you can't, even though you own the movie, you actually can't download it. So unlike Apple or perhaps another kind of other YouTube or something, you can download the movie to your computer. With Amazon Prime, you can't download it. So I buy the movie, so whatever film I bought, but I can't actually access the files. It stays on Amazon's server. So I don't really own it. Amazon's still a real problem with that.
Sorry, Abdul.
Just wanted to make another point related to the materiality and the ownership and stuff, is that I think the quality of the possessions has decreased since like it's converted into digital data. As for example, a simple example would be like a birthday card. So if you were to send like a digital image or like a GIF image of a birthday card to someone, as compared to a handmade or a physical card, I think it has a different effect on emotions of that person. So if I were to receive a digital version of a painting, it wouldn't have the same effect of actually receiving a painting in real, so which has like a frame and I can touch it and feel the texture, and I think all those sorts of emotions. And I think having something like, just like Paul said, like a musical vinyls, or in these days, I don't know, different stuff like that, digitally is not the same as having them in real, like in sort of physical form. That's really interesting.
I completely agree, and there was a noticeable shift, I think, in the last half a dozen years, where people started, and we saw this in academia, where students more interested in the darkroom, more interested in shooting films, and more interested in the materiality and less interested in the digital. I think the same with records. I think more vinyl records have been sold than the kind of than in a long time in the last couple of years. And I agree completely that the kind of handmade, handcrafted thing has become a bit more, a little bit more desirable and more coveted. And in some ways, in teaching you guys to kind of learn things to go on and become, as it were, cultural entrepreneurs, to make a living from this degree that you're studying from. Perhaps the skills that you can learn are the craft skills that other people haven't got, because everyone can pretty much take a picture and use Photoshop maybe, but not everyone can use a darkroom or make daguerreotypes or whatever. So there's definitely a kind of move in that. Although I do happen to think that there is this other, so it's almost like two kinds of students. There's the student that sits in the darkroom with chemistry and making these wonderful handcrafted fiber-based prints, or prints on wet plate collodion. And then there's the other student who's almost like a software engineer, who's taking all the digital stuff and creating these projections on buildings outside. And I think they're both really, really interesting. And I suppose what you don't want to be is kind of lost in the middle, where you're not really sure where or how you fit into that. And I'm not saying you have to be one or the other, but I think there's a gap in that middle that someone needs to kind of coalesce and make it really interesting. But there's definitely kind of almost those two polar opposites going on, and I think they're both really interesting and valid spaces, because what is fascinating is how kind of objects still attract us, even digital objects. I don't know, I bought a new camera a few weeks ago, and I bought a Fuji X-T4, which is a kind of retro looking camera. It looks like an old film camera, but it's a digital camera. So somehow I was attracted by its retro features, from things like record players and stuff like that. Kind of really interesting how there's a resurgence of interest, even though it might be a record player that you actually connect to your Sonos system. This kind of hybrid thing.
it's interesting the point that Abdul just makes, John. That it's this sort of almost emotional human tangibility with something, and that connection that we have with each other with, something that's either handcrafted or something that's a bit more impersonal, like a digital, and the actual sort of meaning can be the same from the giver, but from the receiver, it is that emotional human attachment. I can give you an example, Abdul. The first time, and I've told John many times about this, that that these things that we're looking at now, these laptops are in front of us. These are in fact like the world photographic albums, and we own everything that's on these new albums that we've got. In the past they were folders that we opened up and we got all our pictures sort of in rows, but we don't need to do that anymore. We've got these pieces of metal that we can open up and we can own any picture anywhere in the world. When I first came back from Hong Kong, I've worked in Hong Kong for about over a 10-year period. My missus said to me, "Can you show me a picture of Hong Kong Harbour?" And I got onto Google and just typed in Hong Kong Harbour, and there it was. And I showed her, and she said, "Why are you showing me that?" And I said, "Well, it's a picture of Hong Kong Harbour." And it was a beautiful picture. But she says, "Yeah, but you didn't take it." And I says, "Yeah, but I haven't needed to take it. You've asked me for a picture of Hong Kong Harbour. Here it is." And, she was actually, she couldn't accept, that what I was showing her or what I was offering to her, it didn't possess that human and emotional contact, which was me, which.
Yeah, that's very true when you think about it.
Yeah.
I think there's like a form of probably some trust as well in there, because you don't, just like you said, there's no emotional contact from that person. You don't really trust it in some way.
Yeah. I mean, I had to explain to her that my type of photography, I really wasn't interested in taking a picture of Hong Kong Harbour. And when I showed her the type of pictures that I was taking over there, she was like, do you need to speak to somebody? Are you feeling ill again or whatever? But so yeah, that human resonance is still, is still quite powerful. But maybe it's even more powerful, with the people that we have an emotional attachment with. So I suppose it's like when one of the days I'll come in and I'll bring you guys, a box of Rocky Road that my missus made, or a box of brownies, and I'll share them around the class. And I think you'll be much more appreciative of the fact that they were actually handmade by the missus, because she's a bit of a master baker, than if I went out and bought a load of Rocky Road or brownies from a shop and just chopped them up and gave them to you. It's sorry, we're getting strange sort of metaphors and comparisons here, John, but yeah, it's just this thing about the human connection that I think is very important to us now. That is, I think, eventually, will die out. I mean, I hope it doesn't, because as John just says, it's we've got students sitting in dark rooms messing with chemistry, doing experimentation. That to me is just as important as getting totally engrossed in this sort of new digital age. It's something that we have to embrace everything and move forward with everything, even move forward with our old technology and reinvent old technology. Any other questions from anybody else? Any other observations about the digital networked image that you guys live in now, that age that you live in? I just wanted to make one more comment, John. Sorry to keep you as well. And this is about our photography nowadays is totally democratized. Anybody in the world can take they can record an image, and that's fact. And because of that, it's also democratized what we consider to be news. And it's quite interesting that you bring up things like the Arab Spring and sort of events that have actually sort of have manifested themselves because of the internet, and because of sort of anybody in the world can now take a photograph and pass it on to the friends. In fact, I think the last riots, down in London, the Tottenham riots, they were saying that these riots were caused by the BlackBerry phone. It wasn't because of how people felt about what had gone on. It was just this mass thing that had been created through BlackBerry. Do you remember, John? And
yeah.
It's quite funny now that you guys can walk around the streets. You can all be news reporters. You can all start news. You can all start events by recording something. And in the past, we didn't have that. There had to be a news crew there, or something had to be reported to the police or to a news crew. But you guys can create news, just by walking around on the streets, by recording things, by seeing incidents. And so, the whole world has now become news reporters as well, which is incredibly interesting. It's I know it's difficult to get your teeth around, but it's true.
I think there's something else that kind of builds from that, Paul, which is, most of the students will know, like, you are kind of creating news when you upload your TikTok videos or your, all these other things. That news is suddenly spreading everywhere into different things. As I said in my presentation, that kind of mundaneness of life is now being kind of archived and stored and distributed and presented as kind of interesting things. But there was also something when on the BBC site, I think it was, when they used to, when there was something going on, so kind of a news event, they would put, like, on a breaking news thing, they would say, if you're in the area, go down and take some photographs. And this was when people were starting to share images. And what they found, what the police reported back, that people would go down to, let's say there was a kind of a shipwreck in Cornwall or something. People would go down there with their cameras, and the police would say, "Oh, you can't come in." They said, "No, I'm reporting for the BBC." And so the BBC had to change that message because people assumed that the BBC wanted that, and they were kind of part of the whole media reporting kind of exercise. And I think there is now this citizen journalist is a classic kind of phrase in which we sort of discuss this, but this kind of making of the news story, you can be there much quicker than everybody else. So there is a sense in which the news travels faster, but also can be prejudiced and biased in particular ways, and that's the dangers of that. Particularly in a day where you could go down and video something and make it look like there was a massive gathering of people when perhaps it was just you and a few friends.
Right. Okay, guys. So, John, that's been incredibly interesting. People online, can we just show our appreciation to John for that? As I say, incredibly interesting. It's something I could talk about all day, but yeah, unfortunately, time is against us. So, John, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a
Thank
lot.
you very much, John.
Thank you, John.
Okay.
What we're going to do now, guys, we're going to split you into groups as we did last week. We're going to leave you for probably about 40 minutes, and you're going to go through the